to Sandeep. So let's kick off by asking, perhaps if I can come to you, Joe, and ask what challenges you faced with creating the business partner function and with creating the business partner roles at the university.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Keith. So one of the biggest challenges that I came in when I started at Anglia, which was about coming up for 2.5, 3 years ago, was that we had a business partner function. It has actually been in place for probably about 7 or 8 years. The team was fairly small. It was 2 individuals to cover the whole of the university. So that's faculty representation and professional services. The roles had not had a particular framework. They didn't have an awful lot of path to follow, and they'd become quite flexible and a little bit of a one size fits all, or if no one else can do it, throw it at the business partners. So the first challenge that I found coming in to lead the team, there was a lead in my area, was re-establishing that role, was setting out, okay, well, this is what we do and this is what we don't do. So there was quite a lot of habits for throwing mini projects at the team, or perceptions that we perhaps just went and met with people, but we weren't necessarily influential, or structurally bringing pieces of work back in. So I came in and basically reviewed all of the relationships as they were, allocated specific members of the team to each service, and then we all went out with the same slide deck, reintroduced ourselves, reset the scene, and effectively set our stall out, basically, as you know, that initial step into IT services, as that bridge, as that navigator, and set out a more of a strategic partnership than perhaps we were previously. Certainly looking at some of the interactions we were doing previously, they were much more transactional. There was quite a lot of operational work. There was lots of, oh my gosh, my thing's broken, I'm going to go and talk to that person because I know them. But some of the conversations at the more senior level were going above our heads, and that was impact on IT services understanding what work was actually going on around the university, and we weren't necessarily getting the engagement to steer pieces of work at their beginnings, really. So we did struggle a little to begin with, because the university, and I've worked in local government and in the NHS, is still very siloed. I'd like to work amongst themselves a little bit, and when I came in, obviously we were at the very beginning of having a corporate IT function. Previously IT was handled in each of these areas, so we were facing a little bit of a PR instance, and trying to get ourselves seen as that trusted partner. We're very much at the bottom of that interaction. So getting ourselves seen as being somebody that is worth talking to, that adds value, that brings that information, and that will help with the project, rather than the perception, which is, oh, you've given our budget to someone else and we now can't do what we used to do. So that sprung up the next challenge, which was getting a seat at the table, getting to the meetings that are going on at that senior level, and getting people seeing us as adding that value, as being worth talking to, as useful and engaging and supportive, to champion their areas and to push through to appropriate governance boards. And that honestly is an ongoing process. I think it's a challenge that we're going to continue to face. I encourage my team to regularly review the strength of their relationships, but I also look at the university as a whole, and there are always, I think, going to be areas that we have fantastic relationships with, and there are going to be areas that are going to be a continual battle. We are now 3 years down the line. We have been through enough projects. We've been and done enough work with areas now that they see the value that we add, because they have worked with us to create project scoping documents. They have talked to us about their annual planning. They've talked to us about the digital strategy, and they now get that. But I must say, it's not an easy, quick fix. I think sometimes differences in leadership styles is also a bit of a challenge to overcome. There will be people who get the IT business partnering role, buy into it, absolutely want to engage with us, and there are going to be people that we have to really, really push to get that strength. And I guess also it's about strategic planning and actually thinking about IT as a 3-5 year strategy rather than I want to go and buy this app and it's going to do this. Knee-jerk reaction, actually thinking about the life cycle of their applications and what they want to be doing in the next few years, and really getting IT to understand, okay, well, this is what the business wants to do. You know, these are the courses we want to teach, or these are the areas we've got growth, or this is where we want to start a commercial venture, and making sure that IT are aligned to support those drivers. Probably at the right point to pass over to Sandy.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Joe. That's really interesting. And Sandy, from your point of view, did you experience similar things creating the business partner role from scratch? And perhaps also interested in understanding what you think the impact of not creating the role might have been.
Yeah, absolutely, Keith. Some of the challenges were definitely very similar, and in fact, some of the needs for a business partnering function were similar. So in terms of need, what we found at Southend was IT was very inward looking. It wasn't focused on the end customer enough. In terms of the IT business alignment, that wasn't there. IT were really busy doing important work, but that wasn't clearly and cleanly aligned to business priorities and outcomes. And actually that led to the organization not exploiting technology to its maximum potential. And IT wasn't being brought to the table early enough in conversations. They weren't viewed as trusted advisors that could provide that thought leadership. And that often involved the business trying to do things on their own, and then often coming to IT when there was a problem, expecting IT to bail them out. So, you know, they were all the needs, and ultimately implementing a business partnering capability has enabled a much better business IT alignment, and it's enabled IT to start being part of those strategic conversations. Not having business partnering would not have solved those challenges. And an example I'll give you is around demand management. So, for example, you know, one of the challenges was there was just too much demand coming into IT, and IT felt it didn't have the ability to push back. Often saying yes basically depended on how senior the requester was in the organization, or indeed who shouted the loudest in the organization. And that meant the IT department said yes to everything. The portfolio was too big, and actually it often led to late delivery or delivery not meeting expectations. So one of the key things that came within the business partners remit and accountability was that demand management, and getting a much better handle on demand, managing that demand, but also more importantly, ensuring that the activities that were most important to the organization were the ones that were being prioritized and delivered.
And did you have any pushback from business colleagues, business stakeholders when you were trying to help move to that more prioritized approach?
So that's a question, and I'll answer it in two parts, Keith. I think, firstly, we had no pushback at all when implementing business partners. And in fact, when we shared that concept with business colleagues, their view was, this is great, why didn't you do it earlier? We really want this. In fact, we had more concern from within IT in terms of, well, just help us understand this business partnering role and where is it going to fit into our overall operating model. In terms of the prioritization, that's more difficult, and there was pushback from some stakeholders, but I think with demand, it's about having the conversations with the right people at the right level. And what we did was, through the business partners, we were able to pull and collect the right evidence and the right data points and have the right conversations with the right people. And when you're having a fact-based, evidence-based conversation around demand, the answers almost become self-evident.
Interesting, thank you. And Joe, from your point of view, you were obviously coming from a different situation where you were trying to reinvigorate, if I can call it that, the business partner team. Did you have a similar situation with business acceptance and perhaps concern in IT?
A little. So there was, because our restructure and centralisation of IT was very much, it was a senior leadership level, but wasn't generally supported by everybody across the university. But for the most part, no, there wasn't too much of a pushback. We do have similar problems with demand management and with having a very overly inflated portfolio. But I'm very fortunate that my team are totally embedded in the governance process of our project management. And we actually have a project management board that is chaired by our COO, but it sits on it are all the heads of different areas, from deans to directors across the university, that actually makes those digital strategy decisions about what piece of work goes ahead when, and whether we have the capacity or not. And they are obviously informed by ITS about our resource management. But essentially it means that shouting louder doesn't tend to work unless the person that's shouting louder can persuade their peers that the piece of work that they're championing is more important than, you know, something else that might either already be in flow or scheduled for the same time. It's not to say those that don't shout loudly don't occasionally put a spanner in the works. But I think it manages that demand by committee rather than by IT having the pressure to decide what should or shouldn't go ahead as a strategic. So it helps, really, if I'm honest. My team then, in a way, are the messengers of bad news or good news sometimes. But essentially, you know, when we're then supporting something that we know is going to be supported by the rest of the university, and that tends to help with stakeholder management, because people, where we've got PAN ARU requests, we know we've already had that buy-in before the decision's even been agreed to go ahead. So it tends to then make sure that people are on board.
Interesting. Thank you. Keen to come back to that point about being the messengers of bad news. But before we do, can I just check if anybody who is listening on the call has got any particular questions they'd like to ask either Sandeep or Joe before I monopolise the time too much? Please feel free to speak up or put a chat or raise your hand if you'd like. If not, while we give you time to muster your thoughts, Joe, then perhaps if we come back to being the messengers of bad news point that you made, yeah. I think that certainly one of the things that I've experienced is that when you have an IT team that is, as you said a lot earlier on, a team that is very good at saying yes and just receiving demand from the business, it's perhaps quite hard to then be able to go back and start saying no and giving the bad news that some of the projects the business are very keen to do to be rethought or paused or perhaps in the worst case even stopped. Are there any top tips you could perhaps offer the audience around how best to handle that difficult messaging?
Yeah, I mean, I can only go by my own personal experiences, but from my point of view, it is about giving people context, about giving them appropriate expectations, and being as honest as possible. You know, quite often decisions are political. There might not be the transparency necessarily around why something has been decided, and from my point of view, it's that I need to come in and I need to explain to people, okay, I understand this is your business need, this is the reason why we're not doing what we're doing, and I tend to normally am able to give more context to those individuals to give them that explanation about, well, why are we in the position that we're in, and that might be a financial reason, that might be resource, that might be a statutory request. You know, we're quite often have legislative process we need to adhere to, or we might have statutory returns for the Office for Students. So those tens of requests, you know, will trump, unfortunately, other business requests. And sometimes it's just about managing the narrative, but also about being as honest as you can be with people. And sometimes that means that you have to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And when you've done that with people, you're not necessarily going to be able to smooth the waters, but you can go away and they'll know that you've told them as much. And as long as if you say to them, I will keep you updated, and you do, people will accept the bad news. What I can't give you advice for is necessarily how to keep your business partners afloat when they give that message back, because sometimes it can be a difficult role. But, you know, the more you build those relationships, the more people understand it's not you as an individual, but, you know, your value at adding that extra context is useful.
Absolutely. No, appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I guess the follow-on question to that as well is, if we're looking at business partners and specifically how they might support transformation across an organisation and enable that to be successful where it might not have been otherwise, have you got any top tips about your experiences within the university of reinvigorating the business partner function and driving that success where otherwise it might not have been quite as good?
So I had a little think about this in advance, if I'm honest. I came up with five. Five might be too many at the moment. But some of the advice I've got from other business partners I've engaged with as well, so this isn't just my own work, but find other people in the business who are doing what you're doing. Now, they might not have business partner in their title. Lots of organisations might have an HR business partner, they might have a finance business partner, but there will be other people that tend to fill the void. There might be somebody who is technical, there might be somebody who's very personable, but use those people. Quite often, the relationships that you don't have, someone else might have. And they're often the people who will have the finger on the pulse, who might be involved in a project that has somehow passed you by, or might have been involved in kicking off a piece of work. Channel those people, meet with them, use them and use their relationship. Sometimes if you don't have the relationship with the director, it doesn't mean you have to go and have the conversation. Use the other person and aid yourself by maximising on other people's work. That I've used plenty of times where I've gone, actually, I don't know that person very well. Who do I know that does? And then you can influence them to get the information that you need or to leverage the decision that you're trying to lobby. Make sure that you're embedding value. And that's value from every sense of the word. That's value from people understand why they're talking to you. That's value from a financial perspective. This is something I'm really trying to drive with my team at the moment, certainly with project management particularly. Define your governance processes, have your value mapped at the start, the middle and the end of your project so that people can understand where IT is giving them value, where your relationship is adding value to them, and that you're clear by the time you've finished a project that you're going through to benefits realization and there is an understanding of what value that particular product or system or implementation has added, and make sure that you're associated with it. That will drive stronger relationships and that will improve the experience for your customers. Customers for me might be a member of staff, customers for me might be students, depending on what the product is, but it needs to be clear at the outset when you're designing the project what value you want to attempt to create at the end. That improves relationships and it improves the service that you're providing.
Absolutely.
I've got a couple of others, but I don't mind handing over to Sandeep at this point.
Yeah, maybe let's give Sandeep a couple of minutes to talk about his top tips, and then we can come back to you to finish off, Joe. Thank you. So Sandeep, same question to you. Your top tips about implementing, if you would, a business partner role. And just to remind others, Sandeep implemented his team from scratch, so there might be some different influences. But yes, please let us know what your tips are, Sandeep.
Sure, Keith, thanks. I think I provide four tips. So the first one really is around the business partner's role and remit. And you know, my view is that the business partner role is really changing. And it's now no longer just about service management or relationship management, but actually it's about driving change. It's about stimulating and shaping demand. It's about being able to challenge the status quo. It's both business and IT teams. So it's really thinking about the role and making it really clear on what the scope and accountability of that role is, and what support is needed from the IT team and from the business teams to make that role successful. So that's the first tip. The second tip I will provide is getting that business buy-in, because without that business buy-in, the IT business partner role is not going to succeed at all. And I think you need that right from the initial stages, but also as the business partners land, it's really important that they are working closely with the business stakeholders, building relationships, both formally and informally, to get that buy-in. And those informal connection points, by the way, are just as important as the formal ones. The third area is around quick wins. So building credibility early on is absolutely critical, and I would advise trying to find and deliver those quick wins. That's really important. Or find those long-standing issues that a service area has had and that hasn't been resolved, and try and make those issues go away. And then the fourth tip is around keep sharing the successes. And I think this kind of relates to the giving bad news. There's always good news as well as bad news, and it's to keep reiterating those success stories, both to business stakeholders, but also to the IT teams as well, just to give everyone confidence that that things are working, things are being delivered, everyone is doing a great job, and everyone is moving together in the right direction.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that's a really good one about keep sharing successes. It's all very easy these days to get focused on bad news, but of course we've got to keep sharing the good news as well, exactly as you said. Thank you for that. Joanna, then perhaps if we come back to you for from the other couple that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Although one overlapped very nicely with Sandeep, so I'll chalk that one up to leaving it. But no, my last thing is about being very clear about strategic versus operational focus. This is something that I know there's a lot of people in the industry talking about when I've spoken to my peers in other areas is, we've been working very hard to build up a strategic partnership, people understanding why they need to talk to the business partners. But we are required to support operationally. There are times where we roll up our sleeves, we manage communications, or we work when there are major incidents. Certainly when we went off site in the most recent lockdown, my team were the only ones available to get the requirements from across the university for who needed what kit on 3 days notice, and if we didn't have those relationships, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And there are times where you do need to roll up your sleeves, and that will support and build trust with those relationships. But what I would say is it's a fine line, and we do need to be careful that we don't then become too much of an escalation point or too much of a second service desk. If somebody has your name and they know that you're useful and that you can support them, they will come back to you. And my advice would be is to manage that best as you can. Sometimes there is a use to do a little piece of work or to do something or push something forward because it will help you in the long run. But do be careful not to get caught into that operational trap where you end up supporting the service desk more than is potentially reasonable. And I know from talking to peers at other universities that we feel like we're, one of my peers called it playing in a different position, that we might be on the field, but we're not doing quite what we would normally do. And one of my challenges now is to get ourselves back into the role that we were in before, and get us back in those higher level conversations to bring that information in for the university on a strategic level, rather than operational one.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's some really good tips across both of you, Joe and Sandeep. Thank you very much. So we're heading rapidly towards 11:30. So just as a quick wrap up, thank you very much to Joe and Sandeep for sharing your insights. I think that's been really interesting to hear a whistle stop tour, I think it's fair to call it, of both of your experiences, as well as the top tips that you've been kind enough to share with us. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Hopefully it's been useful. If it has been useful, as I said at the start, we have recorded this session. So if you'd like a link to that recording to review the comments that our two speakers have made, or to share with any of your colleagues, please do get in touch with us and we can share that with you. What we've also got is a very short slide deck that shares some of the comments that Joe and Sandeep have made today, as well as some background ideas that we've got around business partnering and how you might go about implementing or re-implementing a function. So if you'd like access to that deck, again, please drop us a note and we'd be very happy to send that to you. Or indeed, if you've got any further questions that you'd like to put to Joanna or Sandeep outside of this forum, very happy to manage those questions and put you in touch so that you can continue those discussions as you want. I think you should have all of the web addresses attached to the invite for this meeting. But if not, then my email address, and I'm happy to send out all the requests and manage all of that, is keith.thomas@Coeus Consulting, COEUS consulting.co.uk. And if you'd like to get in touch, as I say, I'm more than happy to field some questions and pass on contact details as needed. But thank you very much for joining us. I hope it's been useful, and look forward to hopefully seeing some familiar faces again on our next webinar, which we'll be looking at doing probably start of December, and quite possibly around business capability modelling in a public sector context. But more details of that to follow. I'll stop speaking now, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.